Walt, it was another busy week in the autonomy markets. Every time we think there's a slowdown, it only picks up. This week we had the Tesla earnings call. I tuned in, and lo and behold, call coming from Walter Piecyk of Lightshed Partners. I said, holy cow, Walt's on the Tesla call. Then we had a big milestone from Avride. We had the announcement of an NVIDIA Uber partnership. Then GM signaling that they're going back into autonomy. And Waymo's looking at more airports, but let's start with the big news, the Tesla earnings call. And I might say, Walt, you're famous now. You did the great work for our listeners and viewers. How was the call?
That's what I was trying to represent, the interest of really everyone that listens to this podcast, because I'm not really as concerned about deliveries as I am about the advancement of robotaxis and also to a certain extent Optimus, because that will hopefully service these cars at some point. And we did learn something on the call, from my questions in part, just getting more clarity on what happens after the driver comes out in Austin. There was validation in, I think, the prediction that I've had here that by year end, we're expecting that driver attendant to come out. I think actually on the earnings call, hopefully I said it as driver attendant. I know that's been our kind of language that we've been trying to use here. And that was validated on the call, Grayson. So what do you think about that? Do you think that they can, obviously Elon has given milestones in the past. Some of them met, some of them not. What do you think? Do you think we're going to see that attendant come out in Austin by year end?
You did good, Walt. For the record, you did good. And the technical term that you used was safety attendant. And that term was used by Mr. Musk in typical Musk fashion. He hedged, which very smartly, he said large parts of Austin will have the safety attendant removed. What the large parts mean, I'm unsure, because on the call, Mr. Musk also stated that they're going to expand Austin. So what do you think? Is it the ODD today? Because I believe they're going to do it. Or is that what's going to be it? Or what do you think it's going to be?
Even if unless it's like a very tiny ODD, and even the very initial one that we tested and we have videos on in Austin, I think was sizable enough. Even if it's that, and you have the safety attendant out, that is a very big milestone, I think, for the company, and I think what our expectations are for this industry. And I think at that point, you move on to what are the next things to expect in Austin?
So the next things to expect on the call, we found out that they've driven in Robotaxi 250,000 miles. To me, I'm looking at when do they cross 1 million miles? When do we start to see numbers around the fleet increasing? That's what I'm really looking for. What are you looking for?
For me, it's scale, and it's a lot of the stuff that we've talked about as it relates to Waymo and how Waymo has outsourced this to Move and others. And, I think initially the way Tesla is approaching this is let's build it here first. That doesn't remove the opportunity for companies like Move and others to be that third party that can charge and clean these cars in the future. But initially it's going to be Tesla. And I think it's a scrappy company. And if you go back to the earliest days of Tesla, they were literally making cars in tents. So I think, if they get that safety attendant out in Austin, and my guess is next prediction, you're going to have maybe a couple hundred cars by the middle of next year in Austin. Maybe a gating factor is that service function, but I think it's a company that's scrappy enough to figure out, even if it doesn't have a Move type investment like we saw and we have video of in Austin itself, that it should be enough to be able to handle that. So I think that's kind of what happens next after you get this attendant out. What do you think what are your views? What's your June 30, 2026, how many Tesla robotaxis are in Austin?
If you're looking at June 30th, by the end of June, and let's hedge and say 4th of July, I'll give you a prediction. I would say 300 vehicles plus or minus 50 on either side. And I'm going to say those are the Model Ys. I also do think that you very well could see, depending on NHTSA regulations and exemptions, 25 to 50 Cybercabs in that fleet in Austin. So I believe that Austin is going to ramp up. Furthermore, I believe that you are going to see an expanded ODD in Austin by that time. While Austin ramps up, on the call, we got even more clear indicators that 8 to 10 markets are coming online, with Florida, Arizona, and Nevada all coming online by the end of the year. It's very clear that Tesla's ramping up quickly. How do you see those markets rolling out?
I think in those 8 to 10 markets, you might include additional cities in Texas to hit the 8 to 10, but aside from the states that you mentioned. But I think the process is going to be, you'll start with a safety driver or safety attendant for some period of months. And again, I think that was addressed on the call because of my question on the call. And then, same thing as I think we'll see as Austin. So Austin will be kind of this kind of rolling effect. So this goes back to what we talked about earlier on this podcast, is this concept that some of maybe the more bullish people had, which is like, oh, once it's unlocked, every Tesla's turned on, every market's turned on. Like, no, there is a more methodical approach. And that goes back to the culture of safety that I think exists at Tesla and that they don't get as much credit for. The other thing that was talked about on the call, Grayson, not as part of my Q&A, now that I've patted myself on the back 7 times for that, was in the earlier comments when they were saying that there is a benefit in Austin about not having a sensor stack. And this was one of the primary points you made in an earlier podcast. I was, when he was talking about that, I could see you, I could almost envision your grin about saying, yep, I told you so. Because I think we debated this and I was more on the sensor stack side of it as being beneficial, but they were pointing out that this is, a benefit to them. So what was your reaction to that?
A clap and are they listening to Autonomy Markets? I had to ask myself that. And I went out and I opened a bottle of champagne because I had to celebrate, because hopefully they were doing that. I think it is a very, very valid point, whether they're listening to us discuss it. But if you look at market data, and I think this is very important because this hasn't been discussed. We saw in Los Angeles during the riots that they had in downtown LA, the Waymos were torched. They were on fire. There's multiple photos of that. And then we saw during the No Kings protests, Waymo turned off downtown LA. The reason I bring those incidents up, Waymo has learned that the vehicles with their, if you want to use the term, bulky sensors are clearly a target. If you're going to quote unquote target a Tesla, how do you know which one's a robotaxi and which one's not a robotaxi? It blends in, it makes it less of a potential target. And then let's even go back further in the rewind history. Let's go back to Cruise. There was this video, and I wanted to make a video of it, but I couldn't because of copyright violations, where there was an individual in San Francisco that hopped on top of a Cruise car and was hitting the LiDAR sensor with a hammer. And the LiDAR sensor won. It's like from the Clash, I fought the law and the law won. It's like I fought the LiDAR and the LiDAR won. And that's what happened. So there's a clear target, and Tesla's right with this.
I think their comments were broader than just, attracting the attention of bad actors, which I still think that over time, that's going to become a smaller issue for a variety of reasons, which we don't need to digress on now. But I think the point they might have been trying to make is that as a consumer, you might feel more comfortable getting into a more normalized car. And there might be some anxiety factor getting into a car that has all these bulky sensors, which is kind of reverse logic than what a lot of people think, in that, like, oh, the LiDAR is going to make me feel more safe when I'm getting in that car rather than less safe. So it's basically taking that narrative in reverse and saying without all these sensors, the consumer feels feels more safe. So in that context, do you think that's true or not? Like, what's your view on human behavior there?
Human psychology tells you for the last 50, 60 years, cars have been prevalent. And consumers are used to a design. They're used to the comfort of that design. It's something that they're accustomed to. So I think that Tesla is right in blending in. It's something that consumers are, oh, okay, the car drives, so this is great. There's no major changes. Where if you look at a Waymo stack, why does it need all this? Why does it need all this? I think that it starts to raise a lot of questions. We don't have data to look at. I'm just giving you my personal perspective, but I think that they're right.
Now I'm going to go back to patting myself on the back, because here on Autonomy Markets, we get a bit wonky sometimes on the technology, talking about FSD 14, which is the new software for early adopters, or whatever the early access program they talk about, that thankfully I have the ability to do. Maybe not as broad of an interest, but an important one, because it speaks to the broader private ownership of autonomy. And I got Elon to talk about kind of, is the FSD software different in Austin than it is in terms of, what they're using with what we just got in 14. And I actually mentioned, like, there is a different feel to 14 than there is to 13. And he talked about the fact that, like, yes, when we first launch a new software, it is to increase safety, reduce interventions, and then as that software matures, they build in some more of that comfort level before it's more broadly, I think, released. And I think that's what I'm experiencing, where the car is just more aware. Like, if there was a car coming down to an intersection very fast, and my Tesla, now it's software FSD 14, would hit the brakes. Like, that wasn't happening on 13, but it's because perhaps the safety perception there is greater, and it's just going to take a couple of more versions of that in order to feel. So it was good to get more color on that, and also to know now that I think what's happening in Austin is not a separate software technology. These are things that are effectively the same, just at different points of maturity. So that was good to get that feedback. They also talked about reasoning, but I'm not sure what that means. What was your interpretation of Elon talking about how reasoning is coming as part of software 14?
I'm going to give you a very simple, non-scientific, non-engineering answer. The car has a brain. The car is going to be able to make decisions on its own. I heard on the earnings call the example of the parking lot spot. Park in this spot. If you can tell the car's coming out, okay, then put our blinker on and pull in there. So it is my understanding, based on the call and working with LLMs, that is going to give the vehicle the ability to autonomously, no pun intended, make decisions on its own.
I think one of the examples he gave was the reasoning of dropping you off at the front of the restaurant and then going to park at a certain location. Just one final point on this, yes, of course, I got another version of FSD 14. This is .1.3. To me, there wasn't really many differences. I think online you've heard people kind of gush about oh, it's so much smoother. That has not been my experience. There's still, some of those braking things that happen. It's not as much as maybe the very first version of 14, but it still exists. I'm not going to deny that these people are experiencing this smooth thing, but 14 is definitely not the smoothness of 13. And I think, again, that experience was validated by Elon on the call, saying yeah, this is part of the process that FSD goes through until it gets to that level of comfort, as they develop that software.
As a Tesla owner, I was very thankful you were able to get clarity on that. And Tesla is starting to give a lot more clarity on FSD, the development, and the milestones. And we learned on the call, FSD has a 12% uptake rate with 6 billion miles driven. What do you think, from a Tesla owner's perspective, is it going to take to increase the adoption of FSD from 12% to, say, 20%?
That's a good question, because I thought FSD 13 was great. So to the extent that you give a free trial, and then that, there's conversion on that after the fact because it works really good, I thought should have driven higher penetration. I told you, this is a recent purchase for me, or a new purchase of a Y. I think on a past podcast, I said that the sales channel needs to do a better job at educating and pushing the consumer to tell them about FSD. Maybe it'll take a little advertising, to get this out there. I know that's not something that Tesla traditionally has done, but 12% I think could clearly be higher given the quality experience that they can deliver with 13. And I think what 14 is gonna provide. With 14, with all the complaints about some of the braking, it's still amazing to sit in your garage, press a button, and have it take you end to end without doing anything else.
We all know you're a football fan and you love your beloved Eagles and you are rooting for them to go to the Super Bowl. So what if Tesla ran a Super Bowl ad? Your car can autonomously drive you to the restaurant, park on its own, pick you up, and take you home, all without having to touch the wheel. Could that be that moment that sparks it if they did advertise it, that adoption rate?
I mean, when we're talking about advertising, we're not talking about digital advertising. This is like a branding exercise where Super Bowl is, and television, is part of it. Obviously, television is in significant decline. So you identified one part of television, which is the NFL. And whether it's Super Bowl Sunday or during NFL weekends, then that's probably a good opportunity for them to do branding if they're willing to spend that type of money. I mean, I think a lot of times these technology companies are these guys are tech nerds that just believe if we make the best technology, people will come to it. And there's some validity to that, but I think Google's a good example with YouTube TV on the advertising front, that they think that, we built the best ad tech and we're just going to get a bunch of ads coming in. And anyone that has YouTube TV, and when you get those moment of zens, tells you that they might maybe need to do a little bit more than just build the best tech for the advertisers.
If you look at some tech companies become brands, NVIDIA's become a brand. Everybody follows it. This week we had news that NVIDIA had teamed up with Uber to develop an autonomous driving stack. To me, the question for you, Walt, is this NVIDIA signaling that they want to compete in this space? Is this Uber signaling they're going to go deeper into the ecosystem? What do you make of this announcement?
I think this is obviously bigger news for Uber than it is for NVIDIA, and Uber stock on the announcement of this was up 3%. I mean, NVIDIA partners with everyone and their grandmother. T-Mobile, had Jensen at an event that I was at, so everyone's using NVIDIA for that halo effect. And in this case, what NVIDIA is doing, like we know that NVIDIA is in a lot of these autonomous startups that we've talked about on this podcast. So all they're doing here is saying like, okay, we're getting more data from these Uber drivers for this NVIDIA drive system. So, and that's a positive for Uber to the extent that it builds fragmentation in the market. But you highlight another potential issue here, which is like, if let's say you're an autonomous company, Nuro or whoever, and you're paying NVIDIA, and this is a quote unquote close relationship, and in some cases NVIDIA. But what if then NVIDIA goes out and buys a company or develops their own autonomy stack? And I think we've seen court documents where NVIDIA showed interest in what was it, Zoox, prior to it getting purchased by Amazon. So, I mean, it's kind of like friend and foe, like you have with any big technology company. Whatever happens in that regard, it's positive for Uber because obviously the concern with Uber is that Waymo relationship is still undecided. The Tesla relationship seems like a non-starter. So to have a major player like NVIDIA, kind of push this process forward, whether with third-party autonomy companies or in their own stack, is going to be a positive for Uber regardless.
If you look back at acquisitions NVIDIA's made over the years, they bought James Wu and Mark Wheeler's Deep Map when they started moving deeper into mapping. You're right, we had the Delaware court documents that they looked at investing in Zoox, then two, according to the court documents, they looked at acquiring it. And so I'll go out here on the record. NVIDIA goes here and they invest in folks and they cut this GPU investment deals. At some point, they're going to buy a stack and they're going to license it there. I said it's going to happen at some point. How does the market react when that happens?
So by that, for our listeners, what you're meaning is if they go out and buy Wave, like who's, we think, a leader and someone that's already a partner with NVIDIA, how does the market react? I mean, very positively, I think, for Uber, because of the NVIDIA brand, I think to a certain extent rivals Google Waymo, as well as Tesla. I don't know, like if Tesla really sells off there, because it's almost a validation of the autonomous market. And same thing with Google. Waymo is only one subset of Google. It's not necessarily bad for Waymo. Again, it's a validation of the market, but it's good, I think, for Uber. It's probably problematic for a bunch of the other autonomous companies, not because NVIDIA is going to know how to do this better than, let's say, Nuro or May Mobility or whoever, just because this is the way the market is. NVIDIA has such a halo, such a strong brand, obviously tons of capital available to it. It's obviously going to make it more difficult on the capital raising front for the other companies that NVIDIA doesn't buy. And by the way, from NVIDIA's standpoint, if you do that, aren't you potentially risking selling your compute and other products, your drive software into these other companies? That's why, even though maybe they went after Zoox initially, it might not be the best strategy for them right now, unless they're just saying like, look, our stack has to be the winning stack.
I'll push back on that. Everybody from NVIDIA says GPU, GPU, GPU. Yes, I get that. That's only half of what NVIDIA special sauce is. The other half that's not talked about outside of, I call technical circles, is software. NVIDIA is a software powerhouse. It is great to write on those chips. If you go back to the days when NVIDIA was battling with ATX, what separated NVIDIA from ATX in the GPU battle was their software and the CUDA platform, the ability to write on top of that. If NVIDIA took a very similar approach to autonomous driving, bought a Wave, put a NVIDIA certified software layer, and then allowed other companies to build and develop on that, NVIDIA could accelerate autonomy much further than you and I have envisioned today.
Difficult topic. Again, let's take Nuro. They use NVIDIA Drive, the Thor, which is the system on the trip, but they also use the Drive OS, which is the operating system. So does NVIDIA, or does Nuro, continue to use Drive OS if NVIDIA goes out and buys Wave? Like, I don't know. Like maybe they have to because it's the best system on the market, and they end up competing with one of the suppliers. Again, it's only one cost component from what Nuro or any of the various other autonomy development companies that are out there are using. But I mean, and maybe NVIDIA just doesn't care. And it's like, look, we make good stuff. We'll continue to sell it. We can, sell this product, and, Qualcomm can sell phones and sell chips and then license stuff and to other chip makers. So, maybe that does exist. We'll have to see. And I guess, while there are risks, it does seem like NVIDIA is one of these companies that's kind of like take all. This is like the new tech thing, like do everything. It's almost like OpenAI with Johnny Ives. Like, do we make a device on top of just having, what we're doing with the LLMs?
There's risk, but there's also opportunity. If you stay on the risk and opportunity theme, Uber continues to invest in the AV ecosystem. This week, it was announced, along with partner Nebius Group, that they're putting $375 million into Avride. You and I experienced a driver out ride with Avride in Austin. We posted a public video of it. We were thoroughly impressed. We know that Avride is getting ready to launch on the Uber network. Driver out with a safety attendant, but no driver behind the wheel, in Dallas this year. And Balaji, the head of investor relations from Uber, posted a photo this week showing the depot. So Uber's continuing to take that risk-reward model.
Just to be clear, Nebius is the owner of Avride, so they're just putting more money down to its effective subsidiary. Nebius is like a CoreWeave type company, and the stock has done well as a result. So this is one of their subsidiaries. And yeah, you're right. I mean, we've been at Avride. We liked the product. We have video that our listeners can watch on YouTube. And, they've hit the milestone, right? I mean, they're testing. It seemed like they were on track to do that. And it goes back to what we've talked about Uber before, investing in these third parties and having that type of fragmentation in the market that will hopefully benefit them long term. Again, the major investor concern here is like, does all this matter? Like 5 or 10 years from now, are there going to be, 1, 2, 5 autonomous companies, and regardless of how these early investments are going to be, and who are those companies going to be, and everyone can make their own decisions on that. In the meantime, we'll continue to test these cars and cheer on their development and proliferation in the market.
To me, I'm looking at this from a capital allocation standpoint. Uber has put hundreds of millions of dollars into a variety of companies in the autonomous vehicle space. Why not just, let's say cumulatively, and I don't know the total number, let's say cumulatively it's $1 billion. Why don't they just bring back ATG and build their own in-house program?
Diversified risk. I mean, you're spreading bets across the board. Why bet everything on your own? Which I think is a good segue to our next topic, which is OEMs that, rather than partner with the great technology companies that are out there, are trying to do stuff internally and maybe working with companies like Mobileye to develop their own internal one. And the latest news we have on that is an often talked about OEM on this podcast because of our friend Sterling Anderson, talking, all of a sudden they're back and talking about autonomy again. What can you kind of review that info for us, Grayson?
There's the great line, here's Johnny, or it could be, here's GM. GM announced this week, 2028, in the Cadillac Escalade IQ, they're doing a hands-off, eyes-off system. Pretty impressive, all being built in-house. And then in an interview with our friend David Welch over at Bloomberg, Sterling Anderson said that highways first, urban next. And they're going to do robotaxis as well. Key takeaway there, along with personally owned. GM looks to be coming back with a vengeance.
But as a reminder, GM is this company that was like about to launch a robotaxi, and at the very last minute decided not to and pulled it. And then they hire a guy from Aurora, one person, right? I don't think we've seen a rash of new hires, but all of a sudden, like, they're back on the roadmap for, in this case, I guess, a privately owned SUV. Like that, it just feels like fits and starts. And how do you take that incremental information seriously.
So to clarify for the record, they have been on a hiring spree. Mr. Anderson has done several interviews, and there is public data from Glassdoor and various other LinkedIn data to prove it. But GM has been on a hiring spree for autonomy, including hiring a lot of the original cruise engineers back.
Hiring the same people that were there before back. So Mary Barra, the CEO, like basically kills this program. They bring in someone new, and then all of a sudden it comes back. And then we're also, by the way, seeing Sterling Anderson doing more media interviews. Like, I mean, this almost gets back to the speculation that you had from, I don't know what episode it was, saying like, is he getting groomed to be the next CEO of GM? And like, I don't know, I don't listen to the GM calls, but are people wondering like, or asking the CEO, like, why are you flip-flopping on autonomy? Because how is this not perceived as a flip-flop, Grayson?
It's totally perceived as a flip-flop.
Okay, so we've identified it's a flip-flop after you brought in a new senior executive who's now doing media interviews. So how are outsiders supposed to perceive that? And if, by the way, if that is the end game, why mess around? Like, make the transition now completely. Like, you know, if that is ultimately the plan, like, just move forward, you know, prioritize autonomy when a lot of the OEMs are shying away from it and shying away from EV, and position yourself appropriately. What is the board waiting for?
Don't have insights to what the board's thinking. I can say that Mr. Paul Jacobson, the CFO of GM, gave an interview this week to CNBC where he talked about the ICE engine is back and the profits it's spitting off. And then at the media event this week that GM held, Mr. Mark Royce was there, Ms. Mary Barr was there, Mr. Sterling Anderson was there. Mr. Anderson spoke the longest, and he was the only one to give media interviews. So that's another sign to me that they're going all in on.
Okay, so we'll say. I mean, it sounds like this is a large organization. Maybe there's some internal politics going on. I'm not sure who he was hired by. Was it by the board? Was it by Mary Barra? Like, what is the strategy at this company? I'm obviously, given this is Autonomy Markets, always encouraged when, you know, someone with means and production capability is willing to, you know, invest in autonomy. I'm not sure internal development is the one I would prefer. Is this going to be like Toyota, where they have their quote unquote internal development, but at the same time invest in and participate in production, you know, with separate autonomy companies, like in their case, May Mobility, among others? Like, or is GM, do you think, going to not, or just do everything internal and not bother partnering with any external technology companies?
Based on the press conference this week and based on the interview with Bloomberg, I'm going to say they're going to build it in-house. And I want to give a quote here from the Bloomberg interview that Mr. Anderson said. He said, this is in quote here, I would have been a strange choice for chief product officer if the company wasn't committed to autonomy, right? I think there's some signal in that. I wouldn't be here if we weren't doing AV, because obviously I believe in it. It's a big statement on the record.
Great. But if you're going to change the culture of a major company, no one's done that better, first of all, than I've seen with John Ledger at T-Mobile. Turn that company around, and it was a culture change. That's a CEO role. That's not a whatever his title is now role. So, you know, interesting signpost for our listeners. But I think obviously, you know, more has to be done there. So why don't we move on to the next topic? Or unless, is there anything else you want to say about GM?
It's something that we're going to be watching, and we're going to continue to watch. And as we get news, we'll continue to analyze it.
Let's shift to Waymo and airports. You know, we're very focused on airports here on Autonomy Markets, particularly in the markets side of it, because in rideshare world, these are the highest value rides out there. So we're waiting for Waymo and San Francisco. Actually, someone told me they took a ride and they said, oh, I had to take that bus out to get to that, what is the kiss and share, whatever that ride is in San Francisco. Crazy. And here we are in New York, about to get potentially a new mayor, or definitely getting a new mayor. And we have some well, actually, this is New Jersey. This is like the Giants, right? The Giants and the Jets. They play in New Jersey. They don't play in New York. So this is Newark, which is in New Jersey, is testing Waymo. So is it possible that that New Jersey gets or that Newark gets a autonomous pickup before San Francisco, even though they've been in that market for how long now?
Potentially, in the announcement that Waymo put out, the most interesting thing to me, they're working with the Port Authority. As you and I know, the Port Authority controls the airports in this tri-state area. Newark's an interesting one. So why start with EWR Newark and not start with Kennedy LaGuardia?
I think these are just random announcements. I mean, obviously the challenges in New York City are greater for different reasons, right? Getting approval, getting the power, getting the servicing. So I think this is just one of those random releases. Like, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. Like, you can try and get into New York City, but at the same time, you're like, oh, look, we know we're going to get there eventually, so we might as well start working on the airports now. So thank you to the Port Authority. I think I might be the first person ever that has said that. Thank you to the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, for pushing this forward. I'm definitely much more interested in San Francisco moving, or Waymo doing what it takes to get your pickups in that garage as opposed to that remote lot.
So this is pure speculation, but if you look at SFO and you look at EWR, common denominator, both United Airlines hubs. When do we see an integration with Waymo and United? When you get off your plane, the Waymo vehicles are waiting for you, so you're not waiting. It knows if it's delayed, it knows what the walk time is. United has all that data. When do we see some integration like that? Because then it gets rid of the whole pushback that we've seen in public comments. Oh, the Waymos are going to loiter at the airport. They're going to go around in circles. Waymo said, no, we're integrated with the airline. We know exactly when to get you. We can come from a holding lot. When do we see some integration like that come out?
Never on an individual airline basis, because like Waymo is way too big to get tied down to just a United partnership. I mean, that's going to be integrated in your app. Like, the app is going to know that you just landed and say, okay, we're going to bring the car. They don't need United or any information from United. I already have that capability in Uber. When I land in an airport, Uber's like, okay, here's the directions to get to the pickup. So I don't think that that ever happens unless it's like some random sponsorship deal. This is not like DoorDash, where Waymo and DoorDash were getting into an entirely new market. So I think that's a far-fetched idea.
I don't think it's as far-fetched as you think, but we're going to watch that space. What we do, we get a lot of feedback. And this week we're introducing a new segment called the Foreign Autonomy Desk. You want to tell the audience all about the Foreign Autonomy Desk, Walt?
Well, we're trying to go with some different taglines. Like, let's check in with the Foreign Autonomy Desk, because autonomy doesn't stop at the border. Or welcome to the Foreign Autonomy Desk, where regulators outnumber robotaxis. Global edition. This is part of our attempt to diversify our comments beyond Tesla and Waymo. Although, look, Tesla and Waymo, or Waymo is the leader. Tesla, obviously, great deal of interest and certainly can ramp. But in the foreign autonomy desk, it's, stuff goes on around the world. We've got a number of different things this week. Let's start with the first one. Baidu's Apollo partnered with Postbus to deploy autonomous vehicles in Switzerland. Thoughts?
China's eating Europe's lunch, and Europe has a China robotaxi problem, are my initial thoughts. The secondary thoughts outside of that, it is going to run in eastern Switzerland in the Cantons, which is basically their counties, is 838 square miles. How much of that 838 square miles they're going to run in? I would probably say, 20 miles, 30 miles, 40 miles. And so that's interesting. And the interesting thing in the press release is there'll be shared rides and private rides. So they're going to do both.
That is Grayson's big thing for our longtime listeners. He does not like to share rides. So he's happy that there's private rides. Even when he's traveling internationally, he won't have to share a ride. On the China front as well, we have Uber and WeRide began offering autonomous robotaxi passengers in Saudi Arabia. China obviously being the WeRide connection there. Riyadh. So thoughts there? I mean, this is not really unexpected, right? But this is a good milestone, I guess more so for WeRide than Uber.
Yeah, because if you look who's on Uber's cap tables, the PIF. So for the audience, this is not a point-to-point on-demand service. This is a shuttle service, fixed route service. Big positive step. I'm not going to say big positive step, but positive step because this is the first autonomous vehicle licensed by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to operate on public roads. So a positive step forward is how I would describe this one.
In past episodes, we've kind of poo-pooed the concept of dedicated routes. But I mean, I think there is a role for that in the evolution of autonomy, and that should be part of what we consider autonomous market. Getting back to the airports, like Glideways is making progress in a project that they secured with the San Jose airport in terms of, taking volumes of passengers. Probably less relevant maybe in a developed market like the US, but you take like a set route like that. And again, Riyadh, not necessarily this, but in areas that don't have infrastructure, that don't have buses, that if they purchase buses or trains, they'd be very expensive. Having I don't want to call it pseudo autonomous because that's kind of a little rude, but like having dedicated routes has value in terms of lowering costs of equipment as well as obviously people costs. So I'm different though, right, than maybe the criticisms that we've had from Zoox in Las Vegas that also has these kind of set routes, because Zook's ambitions are more than that. Like Glideway's ambitions are not to ever really go point to point. It is to be these dedicated routes. In the case of Zoox, the reason maybe we've been critical of them not having point-to-point service in Las Vegas in this initial trial is because that's not the goal. That's not what they've pitched in terms of what they want to do. So I think there is nuance, right, that it can exist. We can be critical of companies that have greater ambitions that are currently offering dedicated routes, but also recognize that there is value in the autonomy markets for dedicated routes, for business models like Glideways that I think, are making progress around the world, which is, again, appropriate for the Foreign Autonomy Desk to cover.
Look, another company in the Foreign Autonomy Desk this week, May Mobility, they started with dedicated fixed routes, and now they're doing Robotaxi. This week they announced a quote-unquote significant investment from Grab with plans to expand to Southeast Asia. Putting on your prediction hat, Walt, is this an expansion to potentially Singapore?
I mean, look, Grab, obviously a great company for May Mobility to get an investment and partnership is. So this is another kind of feather in May Mobility's cap. Again, you've called them Ed is the little engine that could. May Mobility is kind of still out there. I mean, again, we want to see them expand, getting back to this kind of dedicated routes to more point-to-point type service, expand in Atlanta. It's a steady approach. They're maybe not as far along as we would love them to see in some of these markets, but when you get some of these validating investments and partnerships, it tells you to keep your eye on May. And yeah, of course, this is a sign of further expansion for sure.
And I will tease for the audience, Edwin Olson, the co-founder and CEO of May Mobility, will be coming on the Road to Autonomy podcast to speak about the Grab deal. So we're going to get a lot of details there. Looking forward to having Ed on. Last thing on the foreign desk here, Walt. Waymo's taking out the old playbook. They're flying in safety advocates from the UK, putting them in Waymo vehicles, sending them home to preach the gospel. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's to be expected, and this underscores our new segment, the Foreign Autonomy Desk, Global Edition, because Silicon Valley doesn't have a monopoly on mayhem. So yeah, Waymo obviously has international aspirations. Google is a global company. Waymo, this is not just going to be a U.S. product. This is, as they progress forward and more towards generalization where they can ramp it. I'm going to restate it again. I'm sorry to be redundant for longtime listeners. Waymo needs to get more cars. Go out and get an OEM. Like every week, I hope that we will appear here on the Autonomy Markets and I'll say, it's great. Waymo announced a new OEM partnership. I don't care when those cars are going to get delivered, at least having something on the roadmap. And just one other thing, we do listen to listener feedback. You've asked for more diversity. And now we've talked about what? We've talked about WeRide. We've talked about Grab, May Mobility, Baidu. I think we didn't hit Aurora this time. We probably should have touched on Aurora given what Tesla said about semis, but maybe we'll hit that next week. But it was a good week, I think, for the podcast this week, Grayson.
Aurora has earnings next week. Besides the Aurora earnings, what else do we need to look for in the Autonomy Markets next week?
For me, it's a slew of earnings calls. Yes, as you mentioned, Aurora's on there. A bunch of telco stuff. Apple's is obviously reporting. but I don't think anything else in the autonomy space that I can think of. I don't think Uber and Lyft are until the subsequent weeks.
I'll say this, Walt. You listen to a lot of earnings calls. I hope you have Walt GPT to dictate them and take notes for you because it would make it really fun and frankly, it would be interesting. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is the foreign desk of autonomy. Walt, until next week.